Oregon football's offensive line is slated to look quite a bit different in 2023 with spring practice starting on Thursday. We're previewing that group on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How's everybody doing? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. In case you're new here, I'm your host, Max Torres, and I hope everyone's doing well today on Tuesday, March 14th. We are just 2 days away from the start of spring football, so I'm continuing to roll through our spring position preview. Admittedly, I'm running a little bit behind, but I'm going to do everything I can to talk about each position group as we wrap up the offensive side of the ball today. I'm excited because this is going to be an interesting group to talk about. Just kind of laying the land, setting the scene, getting the lay of the land. With the offensive line group. It's a position that has undergone quite a bit of change this offseason, both from a personnel standpoint, the players on the field that are going to be playing the position, as well as the leaders, the coaches of the group are looking a lot different, right? So it kind of feels like it's a little bit of a new era at offensive line for the Ducks as we head into spring 2023. Adrian Clem is no longer on the team, no longer with the team after serving as the offensive line coach and the associate head coach for just 1 year, chose to return to the NFL ranks after spending 2022 with the Ducks following previous years with the Pittsburgh Steelers at the NFL ranks. He reunites with the Patriots now, the team that drafted him, coming out of the University of Hawaii. He's going to help coach up their offensive line. And the Ducks also lost offensive graduate assistant Viane Talamaivao, who was slated to take over the Northern Arizona offensive line. And now he's going to be going against the Ducks, joining Troy Taylor's coaching staff as their offensive line coach in what's been a very eventful offseason, not only for Dan Lanning's coaching staff in Eugene, but really across the Pac-12. Tons of movement with, of course, David Shaw resigning as head coach at on the farm in Palo Alto after being the longtime Stanford coach following the 2022 season. So there's been a whole lot of change, but those two coaches are out. So naturally, Dan Lanning had to move and add a couple members to the coaching staff to help with the offensive line, and he tabbed Alik Terry as his new offensive line coach. Alik Terry coming down from the NFL ranks as well after serving as the Minnesota Vikings assistant defensive line coach. He's no stranger to Eugene, spending a couple years as a graduate assistant in 2019 and 2020 with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal helping coach the offensive line at Oregon. So he knows what success looks like in Eugene, knows what a good offensive line looks like for the Ducks. He takes over the position, and he also is going to be playing a bigger role in recruiting. We know that he played a big role in recruiting Jackson Powers Johnson, who is going to be one of the linemen that we talk about in today's episode of the podcast. He's a stud, and he's set for a bigger role in 2023. But Alik Terry is one of the younger members of this coaching staff, the youngest assistant, no doubt, that has his own position group, own room on this staff. Expectations are still pretty high. I think that there has been a standard that's been set for offensive line play at the University of Oregon. It was definitely pretty solid before Mario Cristobal took over, but when he took over, was named the head coach, when he joined Willie Taggart's staff at the University of Oregon, I think we really saw a pretty big jump, not only in the play of the Oregon offensive line, but also in the size of the guys that are being recruited to Oregon now. 6'5", 6'6", north of 300 pounds oftentimes. And that's what you want. You want big guys that can maul and big guys that can move so you can get them out in space and do a bunch of different things with them. So Alik Terry takes over this offensive line room at Oregon with a very high standard to set for on-field play, as well as on the recruiting trail. Oregon's become the destination for elite offensive linemen, and Dan Lanning doesn't want that to stop anytime soon. Also has been a school that's been pumping out offensive linemen to the NFL in recent years, with Penei Sewell obviously serving as the crown jewel of those NFL offensive line efforts. Shane Lemieux is another guy that has been playing in the NFL that went to Oregon recently. Jake Hansen, another one, another big name to know. And now there's a lot of guys that are actually going to be performing at Oregon's Pro Day, going through drills, taking part in Pro Day. Alex Forsyth, Ryan Walk, TJ Bass, Malisala Amavaila Ulu, all of those guys are gone. Longtime veterans, longtime starters at Oregon. They're going to be taking their shot at the NFL draft. But with all those guys gone, it's definitely, like I was saying earlier, a new era for the Oregon offensive line. To wrap up the staff additions, Dan Lanning also brought in Mike Cavanaugh, who is a long time veteran offensive line coach. Spent a little bit of time in the NFL ranks, not recently, but he does have that NFL experience working with the San Diego Chargers, now the Los Angeles Chargers. We all know about them since they have former Oregon quarterback Justin Herbert leading their offense. I want to say I saw a headline that Austin Eckler is requesting a trade, so that's a heck of a development for the former Oregon quarterback in Los Angeles with the Chargers. But we don't need to get ourselves too distracted. But Mike Cavanaugh will be joining the staff to work alongside Alik Terry, and I love that move because he's someone that has 30 plus years of coaching experience. Coached at Syracuse, Nebraska, most recently Arizona State, has some Pac-12 experience. Oregon State as well, knows the state of Oregon pretty well. So I think that that's a great move by Dan Lanning to bring in an experienced mind at the position to really help Alik Terry really just, accelerate his development and really reach his ceiling, hopefully a lot faster. I think that that's an awesome move and one that makes a lot of sense. So with that being said, I think it makes sense to take a look at the position group. Where does the Oregon offensive line stand as we head into spring practice? I think it's a group that has a whole lot of potential, but it's going to be looking for that consistency. It's going to be looking for that chemistry as we get into the spring. There's going to be a lot of guys that are probably getting mixed and matched by the coaching staff. So you have a mix of returners and a mix of newcomers that are joining the program, right? I think starting things off, the conversation right now really starts and revolves around Stephen Jones. He's your most experienced guy in an Oregon uniform. Came to Oregon in 2018 and then redshirted, and really towards the end of the 2021 season is when he carved out that starting role. Has some good experience playing guard and tackle, but he got banged up early last year. I think it was in that Georgia game, and he ended up missing the rest of the season. So I think if you guys remember on a previous episode of the podcast, it felt like it was a weird perspective, and I wasn't trying to be negative, but I did say, maybe Stephen Jones's injury will kind of be a little bit of a blessing in disguise for Oregon because he might come back for another year. And that's the reality of the situation. Stephen Jones is back for another year. I think he also played a lot on that right side, alongside Sala. It was Sala at tackle and Jones at guard, or sometimes it would be mix and matched, because we know how much Mario Cristobal and his staff liked to do that. But he comes back, and I think he's kind of the face of the offensive line. He's healthy. So it's huge to see. We got to see how he looks in the spring. If he is participating in spring practice, we know that was obviously a pretty significant injury that kept him out all of 2022 after he got banged up. But the guy who came in and joined the Oregon offensive line, really staked his claim and made a name for himself last year is Marcus Harper II. Marcus Harper II out of Chicago. I just was blown away by how well he really fit in with that group. He was a guy that players and coaches alike had been speaking very highly of prior to the 2022 season, prior to Dan Lanning's hire at the University of Oregon. And after Harper joined the group last year as a starter, full-time starter, he was talking about how he had been waiting for this moment, counting the days. In fact, I want to say it was over 1,000 days or something he was saying since he had last meaningfully contributed in a game. So you can't help but be excited for this guy. And I posted a picture the other day of him lifting Noah Whittington into the air to celebrate a touchdown. He was saying, "Oh man, I almost threw the guy in the air. My bad." So this is a guy that has a lot of upper body strength. And I think that he is really going to continue taking those steps in his development as a guy who really stepped into his own last year after finding a more consistent role along this offensive line. He played primarily at that left guard spot, for most of last season. So you have a guy returning on the interior that you can feel really confident about. And I think that's a good thing, right? That's another thing that just a storyline around this offensive line. You have some guys that are returning, like we're talking about, and then we'll talk about some of the new faces. The offensive line definitely has some pressure, not only because the standard is so high, but you really, really took a huge step forward as an offense last year under Kenny Dillingham. Now he's gone. He's at Arizona State, as we all know. Will Stein comes in, and he can have all of the best scheme in the world. He can have the best skill talent. Bo Nix can be playing on a whole nother level, but none of that means a darn thing if you can't defend the quarterback, if you can't pave the way for these backs, if you can't give Bo Nix time, keep him upright, which last year's group did a phenomenal job of, was among the nation's leader in sacks allowed. I think they only allowed 5 the whole season, I want to say. So if this offensive line can play at or near last year's level, I think that that's going to be a tremendous asset and really bode well for the Oregon offense. Now, is that a realistic expectation right now as we record this in March? I don't think so. Is the group capable of doing that? For sure. And I'm trying to kind of lay that out. I'm trying to lay that out by making the case for a strong offensive line, given the guys coming back, given the guys that they've added, given the coaches that are leading the group and all the potential of this group. But there is, a decent amount of overhaul, a decent amount of change on offense. We still have to kind of figure out what Will Stein's scheme is going to look like. And I've kind of been saying, probably would benefit Oregon if he can have some consistency, keep some stuff that worked well last year while adding in his own wrinkles from UTSA. But there are, a fair amount of new coaches. So naturally you're going to have some of that change. And I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains when you lose all those guys from last year. But because you have some guys that return, that played a lot of football either last year or have played a lot of football at Oregon, I think that sets you up for success and should make this a strong group moving forward. And then another guy that headlines the returners is Jackson Powers Johnson. He was kind of an under the radar signing for Oregon in 2021, coming out of the state of Utah, out of Corner Canyon High School in Draper. Definitely one of the powerhouse programs out there in the state of Utah, a state that is predominantly known for their talent in the trenches, right? You have a lot of top end Polynesian players coming out of Utah on the offensive line, on the defensive line. You're looking at your Panay Sewells, who comes from Utah. Noah Sewell is obviously from Utah. More recently, you have Ben Roberts. Junior Angelau is originally from Utah. He's another guy that we're going to be talking about. But Jackson Powers Johnson really saw the field pretty early once he got to Oregon. Primarily played center at the high school level, I want to say, but then has since really kind of worked all over the line. I think that he makes a good case to have some of that versatility that we saw from a guy like Ryan Walk when he was shining at Oregon. But it's looking like he's probably going to man down the interior. He might be the team's next center with Alex Forsyth pursuing the NFL, like I mentioned. But those early reps are really going to pay dividends here for Jackson Powers Johnson. And I think that he played a bigger role last year, was definitely a guy that they felt more comfortable with. Remember, he was playing both defensive and offensive line at one point, when we were in spring ball last year under Dan Lanning. But given the attrition at the position, the guys that have moved on, I think that it's fair to say that he's going to be, having a long-term home along the offensive line, seeing that he is needed. He's a guy who's played a lot of football. He's a big dude. I remember the picture I used for the preview on ducksdigest.com was just a picture of him giving Noah Whittington a big bear hug, I want to say, just absolutely engulfing the guy. This is a large human being. All these guys are huge, but Jackson Powers Johnson, I remember he was the first guy I talked to when I started my Zoom series when I was back over at Scoop Duck. If you guys have been along that long, he was the first guy I ever interviewed over Zoom. That was when I was still living in Spokane. I was still going to Gonzaga before I had moved to Eugene. So definitely a throwback, but consider me a massive Jackson Powers Johnson fan going into the spring. I really like what he gives the Ducks. Continuing along. Ooh, that's a good sip of tea right there. I'm gonna be honest. This is like a new one that I'm trying. A tangerine, got some lemon in there, got some honey in there. So get yourself a cup of tea. Try it out. I'm trying to dial back my coffee a little bit because I'm just always having coffee all the time. But I digress. The next guy we're talking about, Josh Connolly Jr. Josh Connolly Jr., you know the story with him, Seattle native, committed to Oregon over Washington, massive recruiting win for Adrian Clem, Vianney Talamaiva, really the whole Oregon staff, getting Connolly over Lincoln Riley and the USC Trojans. I thought that was a huge statement for Dan Lanning in the early recruiting battle that we're seeing between him and Lincoln Riley going on, with the Ducks and Trojans often battling over so many of the same players. But he got to Eugene as the number one tackle in 2022, and he appeared in every game, primarily at left tackle, even caught a touchdown pass against Colorado on his birthday in the 2022 season. So I think that you really couldn't have asked for much more out of Josh Connolly. Last year, you get to Eugene, you get up and running with the offensive line. Obviously, he's feeling comfortable, and the staff is confident in how he was playing. For him to play that often as a true freshman, I don't think Oregon's had a true freshman play as much as Josh Connolly did since Penei Sewell was at Oregon. I think anytime you have a guy that comes in as a highly touted offensive line recruit, that's naturally the bar that has been set, and the guy that you're going to kind of find yourself being lumped into those conversations with. So he primarily played left tackle last year, in that 14J formation. I wonder if he's going to be the starting left tackle for Oregon, because Ajani Cornelius, who comes over from Rhode Island, he's already enrolled. He was one of the top transfer portal guys, regardless of position, but certainly at offensive tackle. I know that he played a ton of right tackle when he was at Rhode Island. So that makes me wonder, do you have Ajani Cornelius at right tackle and Ajani Cornelius at right tackle and Josh Connolly at left tackle? Is that kind of how you're feeling? Do you need to kick Stephen Jones inside possibly? I'm going to be really interested to see how this positionally shakes out for a lot of guys, because you have that versatility, but like we saw last year, you wanted to have some consistency, some continuity, guys, 5 same guys playing at the same spots, and minimal change along the offensive line, because Oregon is in a good spot because they have more than 5 guys. I think they probably have closer to 6 or 7 guys that you feel really comfortable with as full-time starters. So Josh Connolly is a freshman. He's going to be a true sophomore, but he primarily played left tackle. Do you feel confident enough, especially being a new staff along the offensive line and not really having been around him that long? Do you feel confident enough to trot him out there at left tackle, one of the most important positions on your offense, because he's going to be responsible for protecting Bo Nix's blind side? I couldn't help but think about Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side, as that movie, as I was writing this and kind of planning out today's show. So that's that's no small task. That's what Penei Sewell did when he was at Oregon. He eventually carved out a starting spot at left tackle early on in his career. So Josh Connolly Jr., he's back. Can he take the next step in his game? Because he obviously was doing something right to play as much as he did as a true freshman. And then Ajani Cornelius comes over from Rhode Island. Definitely going to be making a statement as someone who can play with the big boys. Rhode Island is obviously not known as a football powerhouse, certainly compared to the likes of Oregon and some of the other finalists that he was considering. I want to say Nebraska and Tennessee, Ohio State, schools like that were involved. But Adrian Clem, even though he's in New England now and his departure is a big one for Oregon, I don't want to understate that. He didn't leave Alik Terry with a bare cupboard. There are guys in this offensive line room, ones that are coming back and then ones that he went out and got from the transfer portal. Oregon also added, I want to say, 5 guys from the high school and JUCO ranks. Iapani Lalaulu, George Silva, a couple of those guys that are already enrolled at Oregon. I don't really envision them being key contributors as true freshmen, but important to get those guys on campus nonetheless. Dalen Austin recently got to Oregon. He's another member of that 2023 recruiting class that is enrolling early, but didn't enroll early, like back in December. So you're getting a little bit of a boost at multiple positions, right, with spring ball starting. And then 2 more guys I want to talk about, maybe 3. You got Junior Angelau coming in from Texas. Big dude, 6'6", listed at 311 on the Texas roster in 2022. Missed the entire season due to a season-ending injury that was sustained during the offseason. So it's been a little while since he played football. But, man, you got to imagine that guy's passion and that guy's drive is just burning at an all-time high. New digs, new location, new team. New guys to really, just push him and try to take his game to the next level. He played a ton of really good football, primarily along the left and right guard spots while he was at Texas. Another guy, like I mentioned, from the state of Utah. definitely known for their trench play as of right now. So he's a guy who's played a lot along the interior. Maybe you see him at that right guard spot, given that Marcus Harper played so well on that left guard spot last year, or maybe they switch around. But I think that he definitely projects as an interior guy that can really help fill out the depth for Oregon, like you kind of see with most positions. But I think especially with the offensive line position, if Oregon's going out getting guys in the transfer portal and they're coming to Oregon after already playing a lot of college football, you're probably not coming to sit on the bench. So I think that Junior Angilau is a guy that, like a Johnny Cornelius, the staff probably views as a plug and play guy, especially because you're losing so many people from a year ago. And one of the more interesting storylines that kind of came out of the offensive line position during the offseason, it looks like Sir Mel's, a 2022 defensive line signee from the state of Nevada, is at least trying out the offensive line right now. And based on some of the sources that I've talked to, it looks like it's going pretty well. But this is a guy that loves defensive line, hasn't played offensive line since even before high school. So just kind of trying to shed some more light there. Obviously, there's a lot of differences playing the other side of the ball. You have to be really technically sound. You got to use your hands really well. You got to have a good foundation and a good base with your lower legs, your lower body. So Sir Mel's is a guy that there's reason to be excited about. I don't know if he's going to be in the rotation, but maybe this spring it ends up that offensive line is the better position for him. You never know. Another guy worth mentioning is the older Laulaulu brother, Faope. Laulaulu, just giant human being when he came to Oregon. I want to say he was north of 350 pounds, but he's really chiseled his body out to be a more agile and mobile offensive lineman. He was someone who got in the rotation last year for the Ducks along the offensive line, kind of appearing in late in games or in some blowouts. Maybe he's a guy that I think could be a top contender to break into the rotation at Oregon. I feel like most of the guys that I've listed already, Jones, Harper, JPJ, Cornelius, Angilau, those are guys that are going to make up Connolly, that are going to make up the starting O-line. But Faope's been at Oregon for a while, and he's kind of seen the field a little bit more with each year. So maybe he's someone that you feel comfortable with rolling out as a depth piece in 2023 along the offensive line. I think that those are most of the guys that I wanted to talk about. Let me go ahead and just pull up the roster to see if there's anybody that I missed. But, like I said, the pro day is going to be going on today. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. A couple of guys like Chase Coda and Jordan Riley that weren't at the combine, they're going to get a chance to make their case and perform well in front of scouts. So that's a big opportunity for them, right? It's an exciting time as we eye the draft next month and then the spring game next month as well. Pair of spring practices for Oregon. First one's on Thursday, the 16th. Second one is the 18th on Saturday before the Ducks break for spring break at the University of Oregon. And then they return and hit it full force in April as they prepare for that spring game. But that'll do it for today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Might be a double episode day. As I told you guys, I got to ramp these up to hopefully get as many as I can into position previews before the start of spring ball. Do me a huge favor, lock in with me on all social media platforms. I'm at Torres Sports on Twitter and Facebook. And then I am on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Comment, let me know what your thoughts are about Oregon's offensive line. Any questions for future podcasts. Love interacting with you guys, engaging with you in those comments, and share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with Oregon Duck fans to help me grow this awesome Oregon football community on YouTube. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Ducks Dish